Right, welcome back to another session. This is stream number 14, I believe, of our series here, Drag and Drop, the final modifications. Probably not the final, but definitely the final things we talked about changing in the last stream so that we could make sure that, some items are not being loaded into the attachment area or the primary secondary weapon that don't need to be there, or, the attachments swapped around in the different attachment slots. So we got that accomplished. We definitely had it straight. We got it working. What I wound up doing was creating this function here called isAllowedToMove. And basically what the function receives is two parameters. The index to move to, basically which is going to be the index in the array, which is it's a slot, actually, but offset by one as an index value, and it's used. It's the index. Actually, it's the index values we're receiving. In the last series, we created a function that showed it actually received the two indexes from the drag and drop, and so this index to move to is going to be the destination index in a drag and drop scenario. And it also passes in the category of the item that's being moved there. And so we just take that category, and as long as if the category is an empty string, that means that we're swapping an item with that's empty. Basically, there's no item in the slot. So we're doing two checks now. The reason that could happen is we're doing two checks. Like if we move an item from, take a slot that has an item and move it to a slot that doesn't have an item. Essentially, the way the logic is just swapping the two locations, and so you got this little anomaly, and we have to check for that by saying if the category is not equal to string.empty, then we'll do this comparison. Otherwise, we won't. We'll just go ahead and allow it. If it's empty, we're just going to allow that item to be moved to any other slot, so the empty item, that is. So once we get inside this if statement, though, it's just a simple switch. We pass in the move to index, which is saying, okay, what slot are we moving into? And then we do a case statement. And since our array is zero-based, I'll set these. So since with this being the index number, index 0 in our array, player inventory array, is actually slot 1 or S1 in our player inventory screen, which is where the attachment 1. Only allow the attachment 1. Case 1 would be attachment 2. Case 2, or index 2, is our primary weapon. 3 is the attachment 3. 4 is the attachment 4. And 5 is only allow the secondary weapons. So, and the default, if it's an index that's being passed in, the destination index is not one of these 5, then the default is to allow, which would be our quick slots or extra slots, to allow that item to be moved, because we can move them freely in any of those slots. So we just set it to true. And so that's what's returned back is the value of be allowed, which is just returning that Boolean true or false if that item is allowed to move into the slot that we're dragging it to. So now if we look further down here, this is how that's actually used. And we may have gone over some of this in the last video, but so we added this in here. This if is allowed to move, and when I pass in, we're checking both items. So we're checking the drop index, which we received from, that's calculated outside this function, and it's passed in. We get the drag and drop index. So we pass in the drop index in, which is going to be the destination of the drag item. So if we're dragging an item onto another slot, this is the item or the category of the item being dragged. That's how we get access to that category through the array, the category item.category. And then we have the drop index, which is the destination of where that's going. We also do another check for the opposite. Basically, we have, since we're going to be swapping items, and the item that's in the drag position, the drop position, is going to be swapped into the slot where the item is being dragged from. So we pass in the drag index as the destination, and then we pass in, from the drop in, using the drop index, we reference the item that's being dropped and get its category. So we got this double and sign, ampersand, which means that only if these two evaluate to true. So both items have to be allowed to be moved, not one or the other, but both. So in the case of trying to swap, a gun out of the primary slot and moving it out to the quick slot, that's fine if it's empty or whatever, we're allowed. But the item, if there is an item in the quick slot, if it's anything other than an empty slot, this is checked and it'll set that to false, so it can't move into the gun slot, like unless it's a gun, of course. If it's any other consumable or collectible or something like that, or an attachment, because those are all specific to certain slots. So that was the only change we really had to make, was the addition of writing that function is allowed to move by passing those two parameters and doing this if statement check wrapped around the code that we already had here from last time. I believe this was already written to do the actual swapping. We demonstrated that in the last stream. And so that's it. That was the change to make that happen. Now the delete functionality was also added to, let's scroll down here. Okay, we had an add item, and so which is in our UI player inventory manager script, and underneath this I added another function called delete item. And here it is, delete item. And all we're doing is passing in the index value from our array, or player inventory array, of the item that we want to delete. Because remember, if we, any updates or changes we make to the underlying or the array that's behind the scenes tracking the data for this will automatically be, when the display is updated with the inventory, it's reading from this array to build it, so it'll automatically update, that view correctly on the player inventory screen. So we got this little function again. Since we talked about using a try catch, I went ahead and wrapped this block of code here in the try block so we can catch for any errors. But essentially all we're doing is checking that the index value passing in is in fact a valid index, because we don't want to reference our array with an invalid number, like something that's not 0 through the length of our array, which is 25, 0 to 25. Those are the actual index values for our array for items 1 through 26. So we do that check 0 and inventory.length, which will always return back the length of the array. And we're doing less than, which means the length is 26 of the array, 26 elements, but this index value would have to be less than 26, which would mean 25 or less is valid, 0 to 25. And so the way we remove that item, we just instantiate a new variable, player inventory variable, by creating an instance of our player inventory class. We reinitialize the item that's in player inventory, just to be on the safe side. It's actually done in this call, but I'm doing it here just to make sure it's initialized. You can see it here. And then we reassign some blank default values to our variables, including loading our sprite for an empty slot, because remember we're deleting it, so it's going to be an empty slot, and setting the stack count to 0. And then all we do is overwrite the index value that's being passed in. We reference that inventory item element and overwrite it with our newly created player inventory instance. And that will essentially wipe out that item in the inventory. There's no longer any valid data that exists for the item that currently was there. And so when it's redrawn, it'll disappear. So those were really, it was pretty basic. It was just getting this, coming up with the correct function and what value we really needed to make that happen. And so now where that's called is in our player inventory image event handler. So excuse me. Now we didn't have this before, the update function in here, but I realized that this was something that was going to need to be checked. There needed to be a way to be able to check. First of all, before we even, like if someone hit the delete key on the keyboard, we have to have the player inventory screen up. So, previously we set up a global, harvest globals.bv player inventory. And so we check for the key code not delete here. Then we check just to make sure the player inventory screen is being shown. And then we also check to make sure that the value of underscore index, which is a private variable that's been defined here, which it's used solely for the purpose of tracking the current index value of a item slot in our player inventory screen. So if it's -1, that means it's not a valid value. And so and the index values are underscore index, the valid values. And I guess I could put a comment here. Valid values are from 0 to 25. So we'll just list that out. So it's 0 to 25. So it's easily seen what it is. And so this update is called once per frame, and so we can continually check to see if the delete key is hit. If it is, like I said, we check is the inventory being viewed, and if so, then is the index value not equal to -1, which means is it a valid number. It's probably not the best check, because if it was equal to -2 or it was equal to 26 or any value higher than that, we'd fail that check and we'd have an index value that's invalid. So really what I probably want to do, just to be on the safe side, so we're not getting... What happens if you try to access an element of an array that's outside of its valid index values? That's considered an out-of-bounds exception error. You'll get an error like that and it may crash the program. So let's just change this real quick to if index is greater than or equal to 0 and underscore index is less than or equal to 25. That way we're making sure before we actually delete an item that we have an index value within that range. That's what I should have did before. But then we do set it back. Well, let's step through this. So we get a reference to the in game controls. We have the player inventory static variable, which is a reference to the player inventory screen, and then we have that's attached to that screen or that game object is our UI player inventory manager script, and so we have to get access to that by putting the dot operator and calling get component and children and pass it the script name here in these left and right brackets, and that'll return back a reference to that script. And so from there we can then use this variable pinv, player inventory. We can reference anything that's been set public, whether it be a property of value or a function. And in this case, the delete function I showed you before that I wrote, and we just pass it in underscore index, which is right here. And again, like I said, that's the value that is being passed in. So in delete item, if I go back and look here, yeah, so delete item is doing the proper check here between 0 and the length, less than the length of the inventory array. That's probably a better way to do it, actually. Again, I should change the, let's go back here. Less than, yeah, let's just say less than, Well, actually, we don't know. Actually, we don't have access to the array here, so we're not going to be able to use underscore inventory. I don't believe that's even in here. That's in that other file. That's why we're able to do it there. So this is sort of hard coded. I don't like that, but we'll just have to know that if we ever increase the size of the player inventory screen and add more elements, this will have to be updated. Okay, so anyways, we get the reference there, and then we delete the item, passing in the index, and then we redisplay the inventory, which is basically updating the UI, and reset underscore index, which is the private variable here, back to its original value of -1, which invalidates the index, so that we're ready for the next item that's picked. So now the way this is set, this value here, index, is only set when you click on one of the slots in the inventory. So what I had to do was add, in our last stream we actually implemented INDrag handler. I had to add iPointerClick handler, which when implemented, it implements this method right here on pointer-click. That's the event that's triggered, the event handler that's triggered, I mean. When you click, the event that's triggered is iPointerClickHandler, and the method for that associated with that handler is onPointerClick. So again, we'll pass in pointer event data, just like we did with our onDrag end here, or onEndDrag. And I had to write a special little nifty function here in order to get the index value, which is going to be used to reference the data, the array for the player inventory data. I had to write a function, and I named it getClickedItemIndex, and I pass it in. From the event data, we get the pointer press.tag. The pointer press will contain the actual object that's being clicked on. So it'll pass in the tag. So it's going to be, if it's a legitimate tag, like S1 through S26, it should return back a valid index. So now if we go look for that function getClickedItem, and of course I logged something out while I was debugging to make sure that we did have the the tag to see what object was being received by the click, and then what the actual index was that was calculated. So let's look at getClickedItemIndex, see how I came up with that. It's somewhat of a simple function. Let me highlight it right here. Pretty simple function here. Of course, we pass in the string s tag, and we're setting internal here. We have a little private variable called index, just without the underscore. This can be a private to this function here. We set it to -1, and then we're actually returning that value back, index. So hopefully within this if statement in this, it'll be able to parse out if it's a valid tag. It'll parse it out and get us the index. So actually this this string, we may have gone over this in the last stream, I don't recall, but I thought we went over this. So this is the same one. I think, well, anyways, I don't know if it was the same one or not. I can't recall if it was or not. No, I think it was this player item object. It's player item object. That's what we went over last time. And so if you look at the way I handled this substring here, it was breaking apart the tag, which is being passed in, and it checks, if the first letter of the tag is a capital S, fine. Then if the length is either equal to 1 or if the length is equal to 2, anything after the S. So in our tags S1 through S26, if you remove the capital S from the tag name, you're going to have a length of it's either going to be a single digit at that point or 2 digits. So that's how we check. We check for the remaining length to be either 1 or 2. And we try to parse out the index from that. So the functionality, or the way the code is written, is very similar to this down here, but we had some additional things that we needed done to validate, because we were validating if the player item was an object, or not. If it was a player item and returning back a bool and doing something a little bit different there. But this is a stripped down version sort of that function that's going to return back just an index value. And so that's how we get the index value that's clicked and use it here. And that's it. So the two things we talked about at the end of last stream have been, accomplished and working well. Let me go ahead and just run this so you can see. We'll maximize that on play so you can get a better view. So we're going to wait for a few items to spawn so we can load up our inventory here. Yeah, and I've been thinking, now that we have our player inventory working and we're picking up items, and that seems to be working well, what I want to do is, I think it's time to, because now things are shaping up, I think it's time to switch the default third-party controller to a decent third-party controller, because we're getting to the point where we're going to have to start getting into some of the animations and things that are on these models so that we can, animate some stuff, such as using the items that we've picked up and, consuming items we might want to have when you actually take a first aid. We'll have some sound, some effects, and some movement of the player, some, actions that represent using that item, or using, like the pistol, for example. We'll have to aim the gun. When he equips it, it'll be aimed. Well, actually, we'll set it up with a right click. It will be an aim. And if it's a gun that has a scope on it, you'll get a scoped view. Otherwise, you'll get just the iron sight. Okay, so I'm glad some attachments showed up. With this. Anyway, okay, so this is perfect. So in the last stream, we were able to drag the gun into these slots in the bat. And you see now, if I click on it, I'm trying to drag these items. Definitely won't let me do any of that. Won't let me drag. Now I can drag. If I try to drag there, it won't swap. But I can put the gun in an empty slot. It'll let me do that. I can move that out, but it won't let me put it in because of that function we wrote to check to see if it's valid slot. And so we've got it working now where it won't let us just put anything anywhere. So really, our as far as the complete drag and drop part, that's completed and done. This thing will only go in the actual silencer slot. The pistol will only go in its slot. The bat can be moved out, but again, it can only go into trying to drag and drop it in these other slots. It'll only go into its slot there. So we can swap these items as much as we want, move things around. That's all still working. So yeah, now if we want to delete an item, I can click this once and then delete on the keyboard, and you see the item's gone. Now, the one thing I don't have yet is when you click on it, that you actually see which item is selected. And we're going to add that later. But the functionality does work. I mean, it does, it does delete the item. So if I click on this Jerry tank here, delete, click on the meds, boom, they're all gone, all four. We may later add a thing where if there's more than one item, it'll actually check and ask you how many do you want to delete or drop. So we can click there, and you see we can empty out the entire inventory simple. So that is working. So let's pick up some more items. In our quest for finding bugs. Just keep testing, testing, testing. So everything loaded in its preloaded slot, if it was able to. Now we have a clip, two ammo. So yeah, we're getting to the point where we have to start implementing some of this. I also want to add a crosshair. So as soon as the gun is loaded, we'll have a crosshair. Maybe by default, for picking up items, it will be somewhat of a dot, something at least to use as an aimer, so you can aim toward items you want to pick up. Even though we do have the glow going on, but alright, so lots of clips. Extra bat. We probably don't need that. We'll click on it, delete. Probably want to save our cans, definitely our ammo. I guess the other thing we do down the road too is if you hover over an item, we can have a little stat window that pops up, gives you some information about it. That'd be interesting. It's essentially like a tooltip. If you've seen tooltips, you hover over stuff, you get a little tooltip. It'll be similar to that. It'll operate on the same concept. Alright, so we got 2 more clips. And it would be nice if we could have, like right now, this is not going to have any persistent storage, meaning if you quit the game, excuse me, I'm yawning today. If you quit the game, you'll lose what's in your personal inventory here, player inventory. It's going to be one of these games you can just kind of load up and play and not really worry about persistent storage. It may happen down the road. Once we have something working, then we can look at adding features like that. Yeah, I need to get a better third-party controller for sure to navigate, because this is really difficult at times. Especially in close quarters like that. Alright, so we got some more clips. Let's stack all our clips on the bottom here. We have no sound effects, which is kind of a bummer. But we have all the work, everything's working now. We just need some more visuals, more or less, but the functionality is there. That was the main goal, was to get the functionality there and make sure this is working good. So what I'm going to do is research third-party controllers. Like I said, that Invector one looked like a good one, had the shooter capability. A lot of mechanics already built in, and animations built into the root animations that are in there. And once you get that, you can drop in any fully rigged 3D model and use it instead of they have a default one, which is kind of like a robotic looking, you know, character just to show how the third-party controller works, the script they've written, and the avatar, and all the animations they've done. But ultimately, want to replace that with something that makes sense for what we're doing here. And our environment is kind of a friendly environment out here, so we'll probably have something, a little bit, probably a humanoid type rig. So, yeah, that'll be the next major thing. So the next series will be starting that process, and I'll be looking and researching off stream more about the Invector, and um, I could implement the free one immediately, but I kind of want to get the shooter one and just have that, because they have some add-ons that you can add to it. So I might, in a separate project, download their Invector free one and just implement that, and see how it works in this environment. I want to really test it on the terrain, because this one here comes with Unity, their free one. When you get on hills, like, his speed will change drastically, like, and then he starts changing direction. Look at, I'm just trying to run straight. Does some crazy stuff. He's not very good with those angles. So I don't know how theirs is either. I mean, it may be that I need to restrict running to certain, certain, slopes only. Maybe it's too much of an angle. I'm not sure. Maybe, I want to test the Invector, the free one, because that still has the running and the melee ability. And then we can always add the shooter later. I'll make the purchase on that if I like the free one, unless I can find another one. But it seems like the Invector is something that's used quite a bit. Ultimately, I could write a custom third-party controller, but that would be a very long series, and it would take a lot of time. And right now, I'm just trying to complete a project and get something like a working game here I could throw in my portfolio. So that is the goal. We still have to learn about the sound effects and a lot of other things down the road here. So the time it would take me to build this whole game would probably be pretty close to the amount of time it would take me to develop my own third-party controller, work through all the functionality that some of these already have that are out there off the shelf that I can get. So anyways, thanks for watching, and be looking forward to a new third-party controller in here.